Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you something a bit different today. Thrift Store Horror is my collaborator on the channel. I use them for resources on what to read next and how to get books that I'm missing. And in some cases, I'm tracking down the wrong book entirely because it's the UK release and I already have the United States release. Anyway, recommendation was 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is a compilation novel. It's all short stories. I have not read this before, but it came highly recommended by Thrift Store Horror. So we have stories by R.L. Stine, Caroline B. Cooney, Christopher Pike, D.E. Atkins, A. Bates, J. Bennett, Carol Ellis, Diane Ho, Lael Littke, Sinclair Smith, J.B. Stamper, Ellen Emerson White, and Patricia Windsor. Half of these authors have worked with Scholastic and Point Horror in the past. This should be pretty fun. And we all know about R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, right? Believe it or not, I haven't really read any Diane Ho, or Sinclair Smith, or Caroline B. Cooney, but I do have a Cooney novel in the works, so stay tuned for that. I will be reading one story from this compilation and then publishing that as its own episode. I'm going to use this book like glue. If there's any holes or gaps or weirdness going on in my schedule, I'll be using one of these stories to fill that void. Just something fun to do. So let's begin. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the join button to show your support. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me narrate them a story. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Lucinda by Lael Littke from 13 Tales of Horror. I have this memory of Lucinda. It's like a dream, and in it I'm 10 years old again, and I'm hiding in some bushes watching her. She's standing on the edge of the lake, dressed in her red graduation robe, because it's commencement night and a bunch of the graduates are having a party there at the lake. Lucinda is quarreling with my brother Brandon. "If you don't come back to me," she's saying, "I'll swim down to my secret place and stay." Brandon just stands there miserably, his shoulders hunched. Lucinda scrubs at her face with her sleeve. "It's Holly, isn't it?" she cries. "I knew I couldn't trust her, or you." "Well, what about you and Kevin?" Brandon demands. "Seems to me you've been a pretty hot item." "I just turned to him because you left me." Lucinda sobs for a moment, then flings herself out into the lake, wading out where it's deep, her red robe floating on the water around her. Brandon watches her, then turns his back and walks away. Lucinda changes her mind and starts to come out. Suddenly there is something there in the water with her. That's where my memory fades away. I was just a kid and couldn't deal with whatever it was I saw. Lucinda disappeared that graduation night and was never found. Brandon told everyone she drowned herself, but I think that someone made her drown. I never told anybody that I'd been there. That other person could have been any of the seniors at the party, but then again, it could have been my brother Brandon. Now it was 6 years later, and Brandon and I were standing in that same spot on the lake shore, but the lake wasn't there anymore. After several years of drought, it had shrunk to a murky puddle off in the distance. We hadn't been there to see it happen. Mom and Brandon and I had moved away soon after that tragic graduation night, away to Newland where Brandon could get therapy to relieve the guilt that kept him from sleeping and made him babble terrible things in the dark. He said he'd been responsible for Lucinda's death, that he turned his back on her when she needed him. He said she was down there under the lake in her secret place, waiting for him to come get her. Mom was dead now, and Brandon and I had moved back to Lake Isadora. I knew Brandon had come back to look for Lucinda, and I didn't like it. But what could I do? I was only 16, and Brandon was 23. He was the adult. He called the shots. But if he became obsessed with Lucinda again, if he totally flipped out, what would become of me? He seemed rational enough as he gazed out over the broad valley where the lake had been. "Look over there, Kate," he said. "That's where I started school." He was pointing to a low cement foundation down in the lake bed. There had been an old town in the valley before the river had been dammed and the whole area flooded as a conservation measure. The buildings had been moved to the new town site when Brandon was a child, but the foundations were still there, like the stumps of a cut-down forest. They had been under the lake for years until the waters receded. "We used to dive down and explore the old streets," Brandon went on thoughtfully. "Lucinda and I and Holly. Holly was such a great diver. Now we were getting into dangerous territory. It had been the diving that had started the split between Lucinda and Brandon. Lucinda had lost interest in exploring the underwater remains of the town, but Brandon kept on going down there with Holly. "Brandon," I said, "let's go home. We've still got lots of unpacking to do." "No," he shook his head. "Not yet," he said softly. "Let me show you where our house was before it moved." He started down the dusty path that led to the floor of the valley. I didn't want to go down there, not now in the twilight of the late summer day. Darkness hung in the tall stands of willows that had grown up all over the valley, except where there had been pavement. A slight breeze rattled the dry leaves, dead now because of lack of water. It was an eerie place, and I couldn't leave Brandon there alone. I had another flash of memory as we walked between the clumps of willows on what had once been a street, our footsteps silent in the deep silt left by the lake. I remembered a painting Holly had done after she and Lucinda and Brandon had dived down to the old town. She'd painted willows, tall, pallid sticks with long, twisted leaves floating in the water. Behind them were the spectral shapes of buildings that were no longer there, but worst of all were the faces caught in the willows, faces with huge, vacant eyes and open mouths. She called the painting Drowned Town. I peered at the dark, dead willows as Brandon and I walked through them now. What if we found Lucinda there, or what was left of her, caught in the brush like those faces? Lucinda in her red graduation robe, her flesh gone, and her long, blonde hair tangled with leaves. Perhaps Brandon was thinking the same thing, because he began talking then in a soft, feathery voice. "The willows grew up after the town was dead," he said. "Did you know, Kate, that they grow underwater? We dive down here and we see them growing, waving and swaying in the currents." He shifted his gaze to me, and I saw that his eyes were not quite focused. "Do you believe what they say about how hair grows on a dead body?" I grabbed his arm. "It's time to go home, Brandon. We'll come back here tomorrow, during the day, when we can see." He pulled his arm away. "No, Lucinda's here." "Bran, listen." He was walking so fast I had to trot to keep up with him. "If you'll just wait for a while, they'll find her. When the waters drop down some more, she'll be there. Remember that article Keith sent?" My friend, Keith, with whom I'd exchanged a few letters since we left Lake Isadora, had sent us an article about the disappearing lake. It had said the lake was yielding up all of its dark secrets, and it told about a small airplane that had been missing for over 10 years. When the waters dropped, it was found there in the lake bed, with 2 skeletons still sitting in the cockpit. I think it was that article that gave Brandon the idea of moving back to Lake Isadora and looking for Lucinda. I wondered why Keith had sent it. He must have known it would disturb Brandon. Maybe that was the reason. Lucinda had been Keith's sister, and I wasn't at all sure his family had ever forgiven Brandon for what happened. Brandon didn't say anything now, but he slowed his stride, peering through the willows at the old foundations that stood well back from the street. "Here," Brandon said suddenly, "this is where Lucinda's house was." Walking slowly toward the stumpy foundation, he climbed 5 porch steps leading upward to nowhere, and stood staring down into what must have once been a basement. "It's here somewhere," he whispered. I walked along one side of the foundation, barely able to see over the cement wall into what looked like a huge open grave. The old basement was filled with brush and decayed trees and other debris. A snake slithered through the deep silt on the floor and disappeared into some hidden cavity in the foundation. I shivered. "What do you mean, Bran? What is it that's here?" "Lucinda's secret place." His voice was wispy and dry, like the rattle of the willow leaves. He used to babble about her secret place, back in those days when he was crazy with anguish about her death. He said she talked about it when they were kids playing together, but she never showed him where it was. Maybe I should look for that secret place too, I thought. If I found it, and Lucinda was really there, Brandon couldn't have put her there. He didn't even know where it was. But where could I begin to look? I peered through the gloom in the area around the old foundation. That's when I saw it. It was a damp spot in the dry dirt. An underground spring, maybe? I stamped at it, my feet making hollow thuds as if I were tromping on a drum. The dust underneath puffed up, showing it was just surface dampness, as if somebody had stood there dripping after coming out of a rainstorm. Or out of the lake. There was something else, too. Right there by the damp spot, I smelled a light, sweet scent of flowers. "Brandon?" I started to say, but then I stopped. Did I want him to know this? He still stood there on the steps that had once led into the house. As I watched, he lifted a hand to knock at a phantom door. "Lucinda," he whispered, "it's Brandon. Come out." He swayed, and I could see he was about to collapse. "Brandon!" I yelled, leaping onto the steps. "Shh!" He put a finger to his lips. "Listen." I stopped. All I could hear was the dry rattle of the leaves. But wait. Faintly, almost unheard under the whisper of the willows, came another sound. A voice. "Brandon," it wailed. "Brandon." Brandon's legs buckled then, and I grabbed hold of him. If he'd fallen into the old basement where the snakes were, I'd never have gotten him out. I helped him to sit down, and he hung his head between his knees. A brisk wind suddenly puffed at the dusty old streets, and the clattering of the willows became almost cheerful. The ghosts were gone. Had never been there, I assured myself. It was easy to let your imagination run away with you in a place like this. The wind restored Brandon, too, and in a few minutes he was all right. It was as if the little block of time just passed had never really happened. Standing up abruptly, Brandon said, "Well, I guess we better get back to our unpacking." Keith was waiting on the porch of our house when we got there. He didn't look much like the 10-year-old I left. He was now tall and looked as if he lifted weights or something every day. "Hi," he said shyly, and I couldn't imagine that there had been any malicious motive to his sending us the clipping about the lake. I would have seen it in his face, wouldn't I? "Just came to welcome you back," he finished. "Hi," I said. We smiled foolishly at each other, neither one of us knowing quite what to say. Brandon made it easier for us. "I just took Kate on a tour of the old town under the lake," he said. "I guess a lot of people come to look at it these days." Keith pulled his eyes away from me. "People are all over the place, poking around. You'd think it was an archaeological dig or something." "What do they find?" Brandon's voice was casually interested. "Old rusty bicycles, tin cans. There's an old car somebody had pushed into the lake." He laughed. "There's even a dog skeleton, and Herb Howard, remember him? Claimed that his neighbor killed his dog and dropped him into the lake. Caused quite a fuss." Brandon cleared his throat. "Have they found anything of—" He paused. "Of Lucinda?" Keith finished for him. His face was sympathetic. "No, nothing. Except—" Now it was his turn to pause. "Except what?" Brandon prodded. "Well," Keith looked at both of us as if he wondered if he should go on. "Just a week ago somebody found a red graduation robe at the edge of what's left of the lake." Brandon sank down onto a chair. He didn't have time to ask any more questions because brisk footsteps came tapping up our walkway. We couldn't see who it was until she came up onto the lighted porch. "Holly," Brandon said weakly. "Well, don't sound so thrilled to see me," Holly said, laughing. Brandon tried to get up from the chair, but sank back again. "I didn't know you were still here in Lake Isadora." Smoothly, Holly pulled up a chair and sat down close to him. She tried to make him forget that he'd been too weak to stand up. "I came back here after college," she said. "I teach art at the high school." I wondered if she still had that picture she'd done of the drowned town. Maybe she'd thrown it away after Lucinda's death. I'd always liked Holly. She'd written Brandon dozens of letters after he moved away. Beautiful love letters. I knew because I'd sneaked into Brandon's room and read them before he threw them away. As far as I knew, he'd never answered any of them. He couldn't seem to forgive either himself or Holly for Lucinda's death. "Why is everyone so solemn?" Holly asked now, glancing around. She looked almost the same as she used to, with her glossy black hair and tall athletic figure, and those strong, long-fingered artist's hands. "Keith just told me about somebody finding Lucinda's red robe," Brandon said. His skin was waxen in the porch light. Holly studied him for a moment, then said, "Who's to say it was Lucinda's? It could have been ditched by almost any overexuberant high school grad. They still use red robes, you know." Brandon seems to consider that. "Does it look like something that could have been underwater for 6 years? Holly shrugged. "Don't know. Tomorrow's Saturday. We could go down to the police station and take a look at it." "No," Keith shook his head. "It's gone. Somebody took it." "Took it?" Brandon sounded bewildered. "Who would take it?" Holly reached out to touch his arm. "Look, I've got this theory. Maybe it's nutso, but I always did say Lucinda didn't really die. Wouldn't they have found something of her by now if she had?" Holly looked around at us for confirmation, then went on. "You know how she was always saying she liked to run away? Well, I think she saw her chance and went, letting us think she was dead." "That's crazy," Keith objected. "She was my sister. If she were alive, she'd get in touch with Mom and Dad and me." Holly shrugged again. "Let's forget it," she said shortly. She turned toward Brandon. "Look, you can't go on forever blaming yourself for her death. If you do, then you have to include me. I was as much to blame as you were. It was me she was jealous of." Brandon shook his head. No, he said, no. I appreciated Holly saying that it was her fault too, but I didn't think she could convince Brandon. Oh, how I wished her theory about Lucinda being alive could be true. It would release Brandon from all his guilt and allow him to go on with his life. But I didn't believe it any more than Keith did. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. I could hear Brandon thrashing around in his room next door, too. But somewhere around 3 I slept, only to be wakened near dawn by the sound of rain dripping from the roof. But there'd been no sign of rain when we'd gone to bed, and then I realized with horror that the sound was right there in my room. Water was dripping from something and splashing on the floor. I leaped out of my bed and across the door to the wall switch. But when the light went on, no one was there. On my bare wood floor was a spreading puddle of water. My heart was hammering wildly. I looked all around to see if there were wet footprints or some other clue. There weren't, but there were drops of water leading out into the hall, and through the living room to the front door. Rushing back to my room, I threw on my jeans, a sweatshirt, and shoes. Should I wake Brandon? No, I didn't want him to see this. I didn't know what it would do to his fragile hold on reality. Grabbing my flashlight, I ran to the front door, unlocked it, and went out. The watery trail led down the street 4 blocks to the old lake bed and onto the foundations where Brandon and I had been earlier the day before. They stopped beside Lucinda's old house, and I saw that the damp spot I'd seen earlier was bigger, and again there was the light, sweet scent of flowers. What was somebody trying to tell me, and why me? Why not Brandon? Maybe because Brandon knew what had happened on that commencement night 6 years ago. Maybe because Brandon was the something I'd seen in the water with Lucinda. No, I cried aloud. I shone my flashlight around the foundation, then down into the gaping pit of the basement. Down there, in the deep silt, I saw another wet spot, dark, like blood. I saw the bright glitter of rats' eyes down there, too. Suddenly, I was running, my legs pumping, my breath coming in gasps. Running down the street, past the stumps of the vanished houses and the old schoolhouse. Running to get away from what? But I was lost in the avenues of willows. A morning breeze blew through the dry leaves, making them clack like the dead tongues of old ghosts, telling me to hurry, hurry, hurry out of there. But which way was out? At one intersection I stopped, uncertain of which way to turn. It was then that I saw the flash of red off through the willows to my right. Red, like Lucinda's graduation robe. It was moving quickly toward me. I couldn't run any farther. If Lucinda was coming after me, I'd just have to face her. I stood there in the silence of early dawn, my breath coming in sobs, waiting. The flash of red came closer, and I could see more of it. Then, as it came around a stand of willows, I saw that it was a red jogging suit, and inside it was Holly. She stopped abruptly. "Kate," she exclaimed, "what on earth are you doing here at this hour?" "What are you doing here?" I stalled for time, trying to think of a good reason. How would it sound to say I'd followed a trail of water drops? "I jog here every morning," she said. "It's quiet and peaceful." She peered closely at me. "You look pale. Is something the matter?" I tried a small laugh. "It's just your red jogging suit. You know, we were just talking last night about Lucinda and her red graduation robe." I thought she would laugh, but she didn't. "I'm sorry," she said instead. "No wonder you were frightened." She came over to me and took my arm. "I'll walk with you out of here." We started off, but then Holly pulled me to a stop. "Listen," she whispered. I listened, but could hear nothing but the breeze in the willows. She stood with her head cocked to one side, straining to hear. "Someone's calling," she mouthed. "Don't you hear it?" I didn't. "Brandon," Holly said. "That's what it's saying." She started walking again. "Let's get out of here." She walked me all the way home. Neither of us spoke. It was only after Holly had left and I was unlocking the front door that I remembered I'd had to unlock it to go out. That meant that whoever, whatever, had left the water drops had gone right through the closed door. "Brandon?" I called out. I hurried to his room, but he wasn't there. "Brandon!" I called again. Had the voice in the lake bed called to him too, enticing him out, away from me, off into the dawn to the lake perhaps? Would he swim out into the murky water looking for her? "Brandon!" I bellowed. "Kate?" His voice was weak. "Kate, I'm here." I followed the sound to the back door and looked out. Brandon was huddled there on the back steps, clutching something red. "Brandon!" I cried. "How long have you been out here?" "A long time," he whispered. "She was here. Lucinda. I saw her face. I ran after her, but she got away. I grabbed her robe." He held up a red graduation robe. It was dripping wet. "Just let her go," I said desperately. "She was trying to tell you to let her go." I convinced Brandon to come back inside and lie down on the couch. Eventually he fell into an uneasy sleep, mumbling and groaning to himself. I had to do something, and quickly, before it was too late for him. It wasn't until I'd gone over every single thing I'd seen at Lucinda's old house, including the snakes that slid into the foundation, that I remembered the sound my feet had made when I'd stamped on the damp spot yesterday, that hollow, echoing sound. Was there a cavity under the ground there where the snakes had gone? Some empty spot near the old foundation? Who could I ask? Who could I trust? I waited until a decent hour, then walked down the street to where the house stood now. Keith answered the door when I knocked. We both blushed again as we greeted one another, but I managed to say that I'd been fascinated by the sight of the old town, and wondered if his family had pictures of when their house had been there. Sure, he said. Come in. Mom and Dad aren't here, but if you don't mind being alone with me, I'd be glad to help you. I followed him into the living room where he pulled a photo album from a cabinet. Remember how we used to look at these pictures and imagine that the old town was still there under the lake? I'd forgotten, and as that memory came into mind, another one came with it. On one picture, there had been a funny-looking pipe coming up out of the ground near the house, and we used to speculate about what it was. We'd asked Keith's mother once, and she said it was a ventilation shaft for an old root cellar. A root cellar. Keith watched as I examined the pictures. I found the one I was looking for, and saw that the pipe was right next to the old foundation, right where the damp spot had been. Keith saw how closely I examined that photo. He didn't say anything, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly as he watched me. Did he know what I was looking for? I went home as soon as I could gracefully leave. I couldn't go back to the lake bed until after the day's souvenir hunters left, but I couldn't stay there with Keith either, not when he was watching me with that thoughtful, guarded look on his face. What was he thinking? Brandon slept most of the day, getting up now and then to go out to the red graduation robe, which I'd hung outside to drip dry. He wanted to look at it, touch it, smell it. It smells like Lucinda, he said, like flowers. It's her perfume. Flowers? I remembered the faint, light scent by the damp spot in the lake bed, but when I put my nose next to the robe, I smelled nothing except mildew. Finally, evening came. In the light of a pale half-moon, I set off once more for the old town. I couldn't even let myself think about what I had to do. When I got to the old foundation of Lucinda's house, I shone the flashlight I brought around to see how I could get out of the basement once I got into it. To my relief, I saw a crumbling set of narrow stairs in one corner. Before I lost my nerve, I scrambled down those stairs, praying that both the rats and the snakes were asleep and would stay that way. It was worse down in that pit than I'd expected. My feet sank deep into the silt and debris, and a rat skittered out of an old tire, staring at my light with glittering hard eyes. But I gritted my teeth and began my search for the root cellar. I looked at the wall closest to the damp spot. The wall was overgrown with brush, but I cleared some of it away. There is a warped, decayed wooden door in the wall, and suddenly I smelled a faint, sweet scent of flowers. The old forgotten root cellar was Lucinda's secret place. It took me quite a while longer to clear away enough brush and dirt so that I could yank at the door. Its wood crumbled as I worked at it, but soon I had it open enough to shine my light inside. Taking a deep breath, I looked at as much as I could see. All I saw in that first glance was greenish slime. There was something slick and shiny hanging from the ceiling, and I didn't even want to know what that was. Now the scent of flowers was overpowered by the stench of foul decay. Suddenly, I heard a sound on the old porch steps. Swinging the light up there, I saw what made my heart stop. Lucinda, I gasped. She stood there in her red graduation robe, her long blonde hair falling over her shoulders. Her face gleamed like ivory in the light. She was smiling. Holly was right. Lucinda was alive. Lucinda! My voice choked in my throat. She said nothing, just continued to smile that set, unmoving smile. She isn't alive at all, I thought. This is a ghost. I began easing myself toward those crumbling stairs that led up out of the pit, but suddenly Lucinda leaped down there in the basement with me, still smiling into my light. Without warning, she grabbed my arms, twisting my hands behind my back and tying them with a narrow cutting cord. I dropped my flashlight somewhere in the deep silt. This was no ghost. Strong human hands were doing this to me. Lucinda, I screamed, why are you doing this? Still she said nothing, but now she began to push me toward that open door into the rotten ooze of the root cellar. She was going to put me inside. I screamed. Frantically, I wondered what I could use to bargain with. Lucinda, I gasped, I won't tell. You can go back to wherever you've been, and I'll never tell a soul. She shoved me another foot forward, toward the reeking cellar. Before I knew what was happening, she swooped down and snatched my flashlight. Holding me firmly with one strong hand, she kicked the cellar door all the way open and shone the light inside. What I saw made my stomach lurch up into my throat. There was a skeleton, brown and hideous from the putrid filth in that hole. It was partially covered by some tattered threads of what must have once been a red graduation robe. A snake, awakened by the commotion, thrust his head through one of the empty eye sockets of the broken skull and flicked his forked tongue at us. The realization that came to me then was almost worse than the sight my eyes saw. Lucinda, or what was left of her, was in that cellar. Somebody else held me captive and was forcing me to join her. I should have known. That smile was too set, the face too porcelain-like. It was a very cleverly made mask. Who was behind it? The person was strong. With a grunt, whoever it was pushed me still closer to my doom. Look, I pleaded, I know you're not Lucinda, so tell me why you're doing this. No answer. This isn't going to work, I said. They'll find me, and you'll go down with 2 counts of murder. Behind me, I heard a chuckle. No, they won't find you. Nobody has found Lucinda's secret place for all these years. Nobody has been down here since I dived down and left her here. Holly, I knew her voice. You're the one who's been leaving that robe around and calling to Brandon and the rest. It drove me crazy that Brandon wouldn't answer my letters after all I did for him, Holly said. So I thought I'd return the favor and drive him crazy. A memory was returning to me now, one that I'd tried so hard to bury. You hit her with an axe. There in the water, there is blood all over, and you kept hitting her. Somebody had brought the axe to cut firewood. Holly's voice was reasonable, calm. I saw my chance, and I took it. Brandon would have gone back to her eventually, you see. She could wheedle him into anything if she kept on long enough. So when I heard her threaten to go to her secret place, I just made sure she did. She'd shown it to me once when we dived down there. She pushed me forward. I can't let you tell all this, you know. If you'd kept your nose out of it, you'd be home safe in bed now. One more shove, and I'd be in that gangrenous cellar. I could feel Holly gather strength for one final heave. I was close enough to the opening of the cellar now that I could brace my foot against its side. Quickly I did so, and with a strength born of pure panic, I shoved myself backward. Holly fell. I got up and raced to the crumbling stairs, but she was too fast. She caught me, just as someone shone a light down into the basement. Someone who stood on the porch stairs, outlined against the pale sky. What's going on here? Demanded Keith. Before he had even let the words out, he was down there in the basement with us. Holly was strong, but she was no match for Keith. And me. I helped too, once Keith helped me out of my cords. I bound up those powerful artist hands that years ago had created the Drowned Town painting, with the hideous, anguished faces caught in the willows. Later, Keith said it had taken him nearly all night to figure out why I was so interested in that old picture that showed the ventilation pipe. When he remembered his mother mentioning the root cellar, he guessed what I was up to, just as I guessed he might, and he'd come to see if I was all right. Thank goodness he came. I couldn't have fought Holly alone. I received a message from Lucinda right after she was finally laid to rest in a proper grave. I awakened one morning to find a small puddle on my floor, as if someone had stood there dripping. In my room was a faint, sweet scent of flowers, and a small bouquet of rosemary, for remembrance, was at the foot of my bed. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Lucinda by Lael Littke. Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you very much for joining me for my production of Lucinda by Lael Littke. This was a lot of fun. I remember one of the presidents of the United States had started a campaign to flood towns in order to make dams for hydroelectric power. I actually visited one of those towns. Whole families and communities were uprooted and moved somewhere else, while the dam was built and the area was flooded to use hydroelectric power. I was on vacation with my family once, and we took a trail, and we just kept on driving through the woods until we came to one of those towns. The town we found was slated to be flooded, and the dam was going to be built, so everyone was moved out. But something happened. I guess funding fell through, and that president's term ended, and the town was just left abandoned for all these years, like decades. When we found it, there were little signs up everywhere saying, the history of the town, and there were conservation efforts in place to restore the town and make it into a tourist destination. That was really cool. We ran into a local and he was telling us all about it. For the life of me, I can't remember anything else about that story. I really wish I could. Lucinda reminded me of that story, and it really is a cool idea to go visit an underwater community like that, and to see how things could have been or would have been, and in this case, to visit your old home before you were forced out and moved into a new home. That was really neat. Brandon coming back to deal with the ghost of his dead girlfriend? Hats off to you, man. That must have really done something to him, because 6 years later, and he's still trying to find her. Wow, what torment. And come to find out, Lucinda was really there the whole time. She was in a root cellar in the basement of her old house, and that was the secret place that she visited when she went diving with Holly and Brandon. I don't know why Lucinda showed the secret place to only Holly and not Brandon, but maybe there's some camaraderie or some secret thing between girls, and it was just something that she felt she could only share with Holly and not Brandon. Maybe that was it. Lucinda being an actual ghost was creepy, and that she was in Kate's room tripping onto her floor, man, that's powerful. That gives me chills. I like this story. It's a good 20-page read. It's nice and fast. It's its own contained little universe, and it answers some questions and doesn't leave you hanging too much. It's a good story. It's well done. Do I recommend it? Absolutely. I had some trouble narrating because I have not read a Lael Littke novel. I want to see what else she has written. So what should I read next? I don't know. Send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also at home right here on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. I really, truly mean that. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales of horror. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.